Winter arrived early in St. Petersburg. By early November, the cold had seeped into the stone of Nevsky Prospect like ink into parchment, and the air itself seemed to carry the weight of something ominous. Beneath a translucent sky, where the sun rarely appeared even by day, the onion domes of the churches resembled the faded eyes of a god too tired to keep watching. On such days, no one noticed the figure walking down Tavricheskaya Street, barefoot in bast shoes, cloaked in a threadbare robe, his beard matted, his eyes unblinking. Grigori Yefimovich Rasputin was not a saint, nor a demon, but he was rapidly becoming something far more dangerous, a living mystery, festering and blooming at once. He had come to the capital as a wandering starets, a man from the remote Siberian village of Pokrovskoye, where horses froze in the fields, and prayers mattered more than laws. His eyes, dark, penetrating, less like eyes than voids that pulled the will from men, were the reason no one forgot him. People felt his gaze like a touch on the soul and could never scrub it clean, even if he had never raised a hand against them. He had been rejected by the monastery, too wild. Even the sect of the Klists, with their frenzied ecstasies, self-flagellations, and religious carnality, seemed to him more like a tool than truth. Rasputin studied people, and he did so with terrifying skill. Where others held faith, he wielded suggestion. Where others wore humility, he wore hunger, for power, for sin, for the marrow of other people's pain. And that was how he conquered the imperial court. He was first introduced at court on the urging of Anna Virubova, the empress's confidant. He did not bow, he did not flatter. He simply looked at Alexandra Fyodorovna and said, "Your son will live. As long as I am with you, he will live." That night, the bleeding in the Tsarevich Alexei stopped. Coincidence? Miracle? From that moment on, Rasputin was not merely an advisor, he was an anchor. Alexandra's hope in her son's survival became inextricably tied to the ragged peasant with the dark voice and unreadable eyes. He was not handsome. His beard was unkempt, his hands rough, his fingernails black. But all that vanished when he spoke. He whispered, and his whisper wrapped around people like smoke. His voice did not seem to come from his chest, but from the earth. In his presence, reality frayed. Aristocratic women flushed, priests went silent. Guards couldn't explain the chill crawling up their spine, but the fear grew. The imperial court was a machine fueled by rumor, and the rumors surrounding Rasputin multiplied like rats on a sinking ship. They said he was a drunkard, a whoremonger, a heretic, a sorcerer. They said he slept with the Tsarina, that he seduced the Grand Duchesses, that he saw the future, that he was destroying Russia from within. Whispers behind doors. Until one man decided to make a ritual out of the whisper. Prince Felix Yusupov, heir to one of the empire's wealthiest houses, was young, brilliant, vain, and just mad enough to believe that evil must be destroyed not with logic, but with ceremony. He gathered a small circle: Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, the politician Purishkevich, a military doctor named Lazavert, and a few loyal officers. Together they decided Rasputin must die, not simply killed, but erased. But Rasputin was different. He didn't just live. He clung to life, like mold to stone. The more they scraped, the deeper he grew. They didn't understand that he could not be killed like a man. He had to be extracted, like an infection, like a spiritual rot. The night came, December 17th, 1916. St. Petersburg drowned in silence. The basement of the Yusupov Palace on the Moika River was prepared. Cakes were laced with cyanide. Wine was soaked in poison. Candles were placed to cast long, accusing shadows. Rasputin was invited under the pretense of meeting Yusupov's wife, the beautiful Irina. He came willingly, walked in, looked around, sat down. His movements were lazy, almost dreamy, but in his eyes danced something dark. Not fear, not suspicion, but a quiet, knowing amusement. He ate slowly. He drank, glass after glass. The poisoned pastries vanished. Nothing happened. He smiled. He talked. He was still alive. Panic began to rise in Yusupov's chest. He left the room, returned with a revolver, shot Rasputin in the chest. The peasant collapsed. They celebrated upstairs. Hours passed. Then, curiosity, Yusupov went back to look at the corpse and saw it twitch. Rasputin moaned, opened his eyes. Yusupov screamed. Another shot, this time in the back. Still, he did not die. Purishkevich ran down the stairs. He fired once more, in the head. Silence. They rolled him in a rug, drove him through frozen streets, found a hole in the ice of the Neva River, threw him in. They thought it was over. But days later, when the body was recovered, the autopsy revealed water in the lungs. He had still been breathing when they drowned him. The city froze in more ways than one. Ice gripped the Neva like a clenched fist, and silence hung over the Yusupov palace like a veil of fog too dense to blow away. Above ground, the world went on. Dinners, carriages, letters, lies. But below, in the river, a body drifted through the dark current, unclaimed by death. When the corpse of Grigori Rasputin was pulled from the Neva 3 days later, its skin had turned blue-black, bloated and slick with river rot. But it was not the water that chilled the pathologists, it was the expression. His eyes were open. His arms, twisted out of their bindings, had clawed upward, as if he'd tried to break through the ice. Fingernails torn, lungs full, death by drowning, the report said. Not poison, not bullets, drowning. Which meant, impossible as it was, he had still been alive when they cast him into the river. That knowledge spread like oil through the aristocracy. It didn't matter how hushed the funeral was, how quickly the grave was dug near Tsarskoye Selo, or how many priests whispered blessings. The whisper was already louder than the liturgy. You cannot kill what does not belong to this world. Even in death, Rasputin took root. His name became an incantation, his life a curse. The empress collapsed when she heard. The Tsar, Nicholas II, remained composed, but his eyes turned older overnight, as if he'd glimpsed something behind the veil of the real. The courtiers bowed and crossed themselves, but behind every movement lay fear. Not of Rasputin's life, but of what his death might mean. And then the rumors began that his body refused to rot, that candles blew out around his coffin, that his shadow still flickered in the palace halls, long after the snow had been swept from his boots, that he had cursed the dynasty, and that his death was not an ending, but a gate open. In the months following Rasputin's death, the world began to unravel, not all at once, not with explosions, but with cracks. Hairline fractures in the great edifice of the Romanov Empire. The Tsarina, once steely and proud, became hollow. She wandered through the corridors in silence, clutching icons to her chest, speaking in whispers to people who were no longer there. Her faith, so absolute, so unshakable, had nowhere to go but inward, turning into a fever. Nicholas, distant even in normal times, withdrew into his war office, scribbling directives with no armies left to carry them. His ministers came and went. The walls creaked with conspiracy. In salons and military camps, they said what had once been unthinkable, that the Tsar was unfit, that the dynasty had rotted from within, that Russia had become a corpse still twitching. And Rasputin, though buried, though bloated and burned in the public mind, was still very much alive in the stories. They said he had foretold the fall, that in his final hours he'd written a letter to Nicholas, warning that if any of his kin spilled Rasputin's blood, the Romanov house would fall within the year, that all of them, Tsar, Tsarina, children, would be cut down by the Russian people, that their bones would lie in unmarked graves, trampled by those who once cheered their names. And as winter passed into revolution, that prophecy unspooled like thread through fate's hands. By March of 1917, the empire collapsed. Nicholas abdicated. The Tsarina was placed under arrest. The palace fell silent. And Rasputin, long dead, now stood at the center of the whirlwind. In July 1918, in a dark cellar in Ekaterinburg, the last of the Romanovs were executed. Shot, stabbed, burned with acid, their bodies buried in secret, their legacy extinguished in blood. Many tried to forget, but Russia did not forget Rasputin. Because Rasputin was never truly a man. He was a mirror, a black, warped mirror held up to a dying empire. He reflected what it did not want to see, its hunger for mysticism, its rot beneath the gold, its belief that suffering could be holy and holiness could be bought. Even now his name lingers, in churches that dare not speak it, in monasteries that hide the texts he touched, in the unease of those who see too much when they look at his photograph. Those endless eyes, staring past the camera, past history, into something still moving beneath the skin of the world. You can poison a man, you can shoot him, you can drown him, but if he is more than flesh, he will rise, not in body, but in fear. The revolution did not erase Rasputin. It merely gave his myth deeper roots. His murder had become a ritual, his corpse a prophecy. And as Russia descended into civil war, famine, and Red Terror, it was not uncommon to hear his name whispered again, not with hatred now, but with the same trembling awe once reserved for saints and demons. They had tried to drown him, but his image floated on. Even among the Bolsheviks, those brutal men who prided themselves on rationality and progress, Rasputin remained a source of unease. Lenin dismissed him as the last vomit of the monarchy. Trotsky called him a symptom of imperial decay, but even they, in their silence, acknowledged the echo he left. They had torn down churches, burned icons, shot priests in basements, but there were still peasants in the countryside who crossed themselves when they passed a frozen river, whispering, "This is where the devil went down and came back up." By the 1920s, Rasputin's story had left Russia altogether. It migrated into Europe, then to America, where it was consumed and twisted into something grotesque and theatrical. He was recast as a mystic hypnotist, a sex addict, a priest with poison on his breath. His name appeared in books, in plays, in lurid newspaper columns. And none of it killed the truth, because the truth had already become legend. The Germans painted him as a corrupter of queens, the French as a demonic monk. In Britain, he became a symbol of the rot inside monarchy. And in Hollywood, he was transformed into something even less human, a figure of supernatural evil. But the real horror wasn't that they turned him into fiction. The horror was how much of it still felt true, because at the heart of every performance, every painting, every shrieking film reel that showed Rasputin's wild beard and burning eyes, there was still that core. A man who had once stood in the most powerful palace in the world and whispered into the ear of an empress and made her believe that her son would live, that her enemies would fall, that he, a barefoot peasant, could not be killed, After Rasputin's death, Alexandra Fyodorovna became a ghost long before her execution. The empress, who had once carried herself like a German marble statue, now crumbled from within. Her health declined, her mind frayed. She wrote letters to people who no longer answered. She prayed in rooms where no light reached, and she returned again and again to Rasputin's words, written in the final weeks of his life. "If your relatives cause my death, none of your children will remain alive in 2 years. They will be killed by the Russian people." Those words, written in Rasputin's unsteady hand, were kept in a drawer near her bed. She read them often, perhaps hoping to find proof they were false, perhaps hoping they were true. Because if he had seen it, then at least there was meaning. When they were arrested in 1917, Alexandra remained calm. When they were moved to Tobolsk and then to Ekaterinburg, she clung to dignity. But in private, her words changed. She spoke of shadows, of visions. She told her daughters to light candles at night, even when there was no oil. "He is still watching," she said once, "and that means we are still protected." But Rasputin was not protection. He was the prelude. July 17, 1918. Ekaterinburg. The House of Special Purpose. Midnight in the basement. The Romanovs were told they would be photographed. A final portrait for history, or so they believed. They were arranged carefully. Nicholas, weary but still upright. Alexandra, pale and withdrawn. The children, confused, sleepy, obedient. A doctor and a few loyal attendants stood beside them. Then came the gunman. There were no words of farewell, no prayer, only a few muttered apologies from the executioners, as if they too, deep inside, felt the wrongness of what was about to happen. The first bullets were for the Tsar, his body folded silently, as if bowing to something unseen. Alexandra was next, the woman who had whispered prayers to a dead man and begged shadows for salvation. Her daughters screamed. Some bullets bounced off hidden jewels sewn into their corsets. More shots followed, then bayonets, then silence. When it was done, the floor was red and steaming, the air choked with smoke, blood, and something else, something older, heavier, something like prophecy. Later, when the bodies were stripped and burned in the forest, soldiers said they found Rasputin's letter in Alexandra's pocket, crumpled and torn but still legible. "If my death comes at the hands of your kin, then none of your blood shall remain alive." Some of them laughed. Some of them crossed themselves. For decades, Soviet historians tried to bury Rasputin again, this time under paper. They called him a fraud, a degenerate, a symbol of religious backwardness. His name was omitted from textbooks, reduced to a footnote. The revolution, they said, had no use for such mystics. But something strange happened in the silence. He grew louder. Rumors surfaced that Stalin had ordered a private investigation into Rasputin's life, hoping to understand how a mere peasant could seduce an empire. NKVD files vanished. Orthodox priests in Siberia kept forbidden icons hidden in cellars, hand-painted depictions of Rasputin with a bleeding halo and open palms. Some whispered that he had been a vessel, not of God or devil, but of history itself, that he had come not to save Russia, but to unmask it. In the 1940s, German officers occupying villages in the east discovered peasants who still lit candles before faded portraits of Rasputin. They asked why. Because the dead man sees was the answer. Rasputin became a magnet. In the West, occultists claimed he had unlocked forbidden powers, the ability to control minds, to transmute pain, to defy death. In France, surrealists painted him as the last prophet of apocalypse. In London, war refugees invoked him as a warning. This is what happens when a nation worships shadows. And then came the cinema. His story was turned into madness. On film, he became a necromancer, a devil priest, a sexual predator, a beast in human form. The more absurd the stories became, the deeper the fascination. Because deep down, something in the audience wanted it to be true. That there had been a man who could not be drowned. That death was not the end. That one voice, no matter how cracked, how strange, could bend empires. Rasputin, now hollowed out by fiction, still stood tall in the dark corners of the world. In certain Russian villages, candles still burn on the day of his murder. In underground libraries, his letters are read aloud as scripture. In dreams, people see him, wet, shivering, eyes wide, walking through the snow with footprints that do not melt. And those who see him say only one thing: he never stopped breathing. The century turned. Soviet silence gave way to capitalist noise. Russia remade itself again. In steel, in oil, in neon. The Orthodox Church returned to power, draped in gold. Oligarchs replaced commissars. Towers of glass rose where monuments had fallen. But even in this new world of luxury brands, digital news feeds, and televised miracles, Rasputin lingered like smoke in the rafters of a burned-out cathedral. He reappeared, not in body, but in fragments. In a Moscow nightclub, his face adorned a bottle of vodka. In St. Petersburg, his name was stamped on fortune-teller booths. In Serbia, a sect declared him the Black Saint. In Japan, manga artists reimagined him as a warrior sorcerer. His eyes stared from t-shirts. His name was a brand. But beneath the irony and kitsch, the old question remained. What was he? A fraud? A prophet? A disease? You could not Google him without falling into contradiction. You found the noble healer and the madman, the monster and the martyr, the sex maniac and the saint. And all of them were true, or none were. Every version contradicted the next. Every truth collapsed into mystery. And still he was studied. The CIA kept psychological privileges. Esoteric YouTube channels declared him a frequency manipulator. Conspiracy theorists linked his name to Anastasia, to Tesla, to the Tunguska event. He became the face of a question modernity still couldn't answer. What happens when belief outruns fact?